Welcome to the Fit for Business and Life podcast. The Fit for Business and Life podcast is brought to you in partnership with Sharp Fit for Life and the Business Body Network, helping and improving the lives and performance and transforming those overweight, overworked, overwhelmed, busy professionals, entrepreneurs, consultants, and their teams to make them fitter, happier, healthier, and even more higher achieving in business and in life. The Fit for Business and Life podcast is all about sharing passion, knowledge and expertise around business and personal performance from our host, myself, Martin Sharp, a 30-year change maker in businesses large, like $16 billion type asset transfers, and small, so people doing like small multi-million-pound transformations, and also some of our greatest guests, people that are willing to come here and share their expertise, their kind of experience in what they've done, changing businesses and change their own personal performance, featuring inspirational stories, insights, tips, practical knowledge and know-how, and also bringing more health, happiness and higher achievement to your world as well. And today I am absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce our special guest for today, who is Claire Fudge. Now, Claire, you may not know this, has a background as a clinical dietitian, and she brings expertise in nutrition, health and sports, offering personalized strategies to optimize performance for busy professionals. She's also done a whole load of things herself around sports and personal performance, around the Olympics, elite circuits, etc., competing and supporting teams in those kind of events. And she's also the clinical director of her own business, Fourth Discipline, and she's helping bringing those kind of high performance skills and nutrition to endurance athletes as well as to business athletes as well. So, Claire, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. And we've had lots of discussions over the last, 8 months now?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have probably heard me reference Claire when we spoke about my journey in doing the marathons recently. So it was Mike Dales who originally said, Mike, you need to speak to Claire, when we was going through talking about the early days of the marathon training and specifically around how to get that nutritional component right. Because I think what I didn't realize at the time, and I think a lot of people don't realize, is there is such a performance difference and such a change physiologically that's happening inside the body between just taking on like a 10K or even a half marathon comparison to a marathon. And yeah, it's just been fabulous learning so much about that over this last year. And I really am so grateful that you've been there on that journey with me.
It's been fun. It's been fun to actually, come on that journey slightly with you. I didn't run the marathons with you, obviously, although I would have liked to. But it's been great. And it's been great to really see you kind of learning a different side of nutrition, because of course you do so much with nutrition yourself, but really kind of learning actually what do I need to do specifically for more of that endurance event. And so that was really interesting to kind of work with you on that.
Yeah, and that's the thing I found really fascinating. I know I've made you laugh so many times. so taking obviously learning about nutrition, how you utilize it for things like fat loss and utilizing it for strength and conditioning training. I kind of brought that knowledge into doing the running, and while it was great for doing the 10Ks up to half marathon, that was okay, but actually it didn't work for endurance. And I remember when you were saying, well, what have you actually been doing? And I says, well, I tried the chicken and rice thing before running and that didn't kind of work. I even tried eating flapjack and that didn't kind of work. And I says the whole point of eating things like date bars and the eating and the chewing and the breathing and the running, it's just too much for my small brain. And it's just such a change, actually, the way you fuel yourself for endurance in comparison.
I think that's also where people make these big mistakes, because I think you can have something very generic that you follow, but the problem is when you're trying to be very specific for a specific event, you have to really work with your body and say, okay, what does my body actually need in terms of fuel? What is my body doing in terms of from a physiological perspective? So working with your own systems, and then going out and trying things out. So taking evidence and saying, okay, but then for me as a human being, how does it work? And I think that's what you certainly experienced, wasn't it? It's like, well, I'm open to slightly, this different way of being very specific about my nutrition. And then you went, okay, I will go out and try it out. So that was a really great journey, is this kind of trialing, tweaking it, going back and seeing what worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was all sorts of little nuggets you kind of brought in, especially right in the early days, because obviously we had the conversations just before Christmas, but we all knew it was going to be the 16 weeks after Christmas up to the London Marathon where we were really going to try and get right. And one of the things you mentioned there was it takes about 12 weeks to train your gut effectively to a new diet, a new way of working. So one of the first things to say, oh, let's just go with the gels. So it was then, okay, well, which gels do we go with, and what's actually happening at each event? So it's then actually doing some of the research of, what does each of those marathons provide with regards to fueling stations, hydration stations, and then almost like planning the training of the gut around actually what that event's going to be.
Yeah, and it's like the logistics. So I always talk about kind of the logistics of, if you're at a big race, actually, they'll always provide some sort of nutrition. There's some nutrition sponsor, and whilst not everybody gets on with those certain types of nutrition, actually, one of the things we talked about is, well, are you going to take it all with you? Because actually, over a marathon, that's a lot of gels, right? To carry, that's extra weight. So if we're thinking about running economy and efficiency, you don't want to be carrying lots with you. So if you can utilize what's on course, and it's then being really specific and thinking, okay, at what points is this nutrition on course? Where are the water stations? So that you can be really clear when you go into a race that your nutrition is really sorted. You've got a plan, you've got a strategy, but most importantly, you've got an A, B, and C strategy. Because what happens when it doesn't go so well? And I know when you're training, there were things where you went, oh, that actually didn't work so well, and so learning that in training is really important, training your gut, as you said, but also having this strategy for race day. And I'm sure you experienced over some of those race days where you had your plan, but actually then you went, actually, God, I ended up having Gatorade, and actually I was fine. It wasn't in the plan, but it was my B strategy, and actually I was okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because you mentioned about the logistics side of it. And from a business perspective, one of the kind of the common quoted almost cliches is, the amateurs talk strategy and tactics. And it's actually the professionals, the people who have been through it, that talk logistics. And that's the way you kind of make things work. Because actually, if you don't have the things in place, actually are the precursors effectively, then you can't get the result at the end of it. And so when we went through my journey, you at the beginning was saying, okay, let's do the gels, and I think the original kind of thought was you're going to be somewhere between 40 and 80 grams of carbs every half an hour is roughly the idea. And you kind of looked me up and down, you're big, you're probably more than 80 grams, but let's start on the small side first. And again, that's where we tested it. We went out, we did in the half marathons, it didn't make a difference. So training the gut, the 40 grams of carbs was okay. And kind of I understand now a lot more why, because obviously your body's got so much more glycogen at that point. But when you turn in to do the marathon, when we did the full marathon training in February, actually that's where we really saw the difference, because we did have that point where I think, what was it, 27 kilometers in, just it was almost like hitting the wall. And that's when we suddenly realized, it's definitely going to be more the 80 grams of carbs.
And I think, you talked about sort of 10K and, your approach with working in a slightly different sphere in terms of nutrition. And then this was kind of really different for you in terms of endurance, and sort of changing that mindset around is people can get away almost, so to speak, with actually a shorter distance, because you do have stored glycogen, so stored carbohydrate in your in your liver and in your muscles, and we know now there's different research that people can store more, and also being male and with your build, actually working with that and saying, okay, for you physiologically, without testing, how is this going to work for you, how much are you going to need to have? I think it's really important for people to remember that they've got to fuel their body enough, and what a lot of people do is they underfuel. And what happens is then you can't actually finish that race, or you can't do the training to be able to get to that race in the first place. So this kind of, I always call it like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like this kind of, well, I will fuel a little bit, but I don't want to put on weight, or I don't need as much carbohydrate as that. And what happens is you underperform in your training, and then you either get injured, or a training session becomes shortened because you can't finish it. So actually, it's about fueling enough for the work you're actually doing, and taking into account like your own physiology. And of course, men actually are different to women, by the way, but in terms of utilizing fat as a fuel, and there's so many kind of myths out there in terms of using fat as a fuel, but what you experienced actually is where your body did come up against, actually, I can no longer like just utilize this fat as a fuel. Your glycogen stores will have run really low, even though you were kind of topping up. And that was a really great thing to see, that once you started going, actually, if I do feel a bit more, oh my God, I feel so different. Interestingly, how was your recovery when you were fueling a lot better with carbohydrate?
The recovery's been great.
Yeah.
So I think that was the other side, because everyone was always asking the same questions: how's your recovery? How come you're not getting injured, etc. But I think that comes back down to exactly like you were saying, we were fueling the right way.
Yeah.
So the big difference for me was when I was fueling for strength and conditioning training, and this is what usually surprises a lot of my clients, is I pushed their calories all the way up. So you know, if they were thinking they needed 2,000 calories, it might be 3,000, depending on their physiology, etc. And then you just gradually start to decline it. So as they start to plateau, the changes aren't happening the way they want to have them, whether that's muscle gain or or weight loss, whatever it is they're looking for, you change it. So you increase, decrease, and you just keep that change happening over time. Whereas with the endurance training, what I kind of realised, and I think we kind of made this switch in the end of January, beginning of February, is actually I had to put an extra 1,000 calories onto what I was eating to give myself the energy throughout the entire week for all the training. So I was doing like 5 runs a week, you know, a speed run, which is usually either like intervals or hill training.
Well, you're going to be using carbohydrates so much quicker in those sessions, aren't you, as well?
And then your long run, etc. So I'd be doing like, at the start it was like 10 kilometers would be a long run. By the time we'd finished it, I think it was like 32 kilometers was the normal long run, which actually I quite enjoyed. And then you have lots of like recovery runs in the middle, so like somewhere between like 25 minutes to an hour, and that was great, but I needed to fuel for that. But because I fueled for it, I had the energy each day to complete it without feeling dreadful. I mean, don't get me wrong, I knew I had a workout, and at the same time I wasn't injured. So I was always on the point where actually I could continue to do the training. And then when we did the long runs, as we said, we kind of changed in the January to start adding the strategy of adding more fuel in there. And that's when we kind of realised, actually I need a fair few more calories actually for doing the long runs. So by the time I was doing the last month and a half's worth of training, just before I started tapering, I was up at like, I don't know, at least an 80 grams worth of carbohydrates every hour, plus the other bits that we were adding in there. And that worked. So it meant that I'd taken what would have been my normal calorie value, which is somewhere between like 3,000 and 2,000, depending on where I am in my strength and conditioning training, up to, at some points, I mean, marathons, it was nearly 6,000 calories just to get through it.
And let's blow something out of the water as well here, is that a lot of people think that if I take on all of that carbohydrate, that I'm just going to gain weight or stay the same weight. And certainly having, you know, seen you on various occasions, like certainly isn't the case for you. So tell me your experience of that, because I think people often think, well, you know, and I come back to this kind of, let's call it semi-restriction of carbohydrates, that actually when you have enough, so that you can really perform really well at high intensities in your short runs. What happened to your body composition over that time?
It stayed relatively the same, actually. So I've not necessarily lost any muscle or anything. And in fact, at some points I did lose weight, which, you know, I think was just due to the fact of, you know, the amount of energy you use. And that was the interesting part. After each of the marathons, the drop was quite significant. You drop down by about 6 kilograms, but a lot of that is hydration. You kind of,
and glycogen stores, of course, as well. So
you've kind of got those to top up over the next few days, and I did see it creep back up again and then drop back down. So that it's just the normal. What I've now learned is it's the normal cycle of how that body works.
And I think, you know, the idea that, you know, you're going to gain weight by taking all these carbohydrates on is just, you know, well, you've kind of shown actually, I managed to maintain muscle mass despite using this carbohydrate and doing endurance training. So you know, I think having that really nice balance is amazing, and not everybody gets that right. And also, you know, we always talk about kind of fueling for the work that you're actually doing. And you were talking about endurance there, and I was thinking, you know, some like boardroom meetings are like a feat of endurance, are they not? And yet people will go into a meeting and, you know, not fuel properly. And I'm not talking about, you know, 80, 100 grams of carbohydrates. That's, you know, you're not running a marathon, but actually the fuel that you need to make your brain work in a long meeting, or you know, going into something that's really important in terms of making a big sale, as an example. I often see like business professionals do not fuel themselves properly to be able for their brain to perform properly. So all this focus, you know, on you getting this nutrition right for this marathon and this training. I mean, what mistakes do you see business professionals making?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I think it's easy to not eat. And I get it. I've been there.
Yeah,
I've kind of done it. And you get stuck into a problem. You're in a meeting, etc. And your focus has to be on that point. And you're so in the zone doing that actually you don't listen to what your body's telling you.
Yeah.
And it's not because you don't want to. It's not because you don't know about it. It is literally because you've got that. And I think this is one of the things I recognised when I was doing the marathon as well. So I set a timer. So every half an hour, I was taking the carbohydrates in because I knew when I was in flow and I was actually just running. I when the training runs, it was some days you go out and you do 18 kilometres and you look at your watch, like 5k, and it's like great, it's going really well. Look at your watch, you down and it's like 18k. Where the hell did that 3k, that 13k go or something? And it's easily done. And that happens also when you're in the zone, when you're in work and stuff. So almost like start to know what your own body is like, and
like these little prompts as well, I think, are really important, aren't they?
Exactly. So that you do take that in, and what I don't think many people realise, but the brain does take up the vast majority of the energy that you consume. So if you're in there, you're doing lots of thought-provoking stuff, or you're in there trying to be creative and trying to come up with ideas and solutions, etc. You need to fuel it in the right kind of way, and that isn't always the brown bag lunches that you're getting bored with.
Or the buffets that I always talk about. Like it's difficult to navigate, isn't it? And I think learning how to navigate that and actually what works, for you is really important. And I guess that comes back to like this trial and testing. When you were navigating the marathon training for the first time, like going out there, testing it, seeing what works for you, and seeing actually how does your body respond. I was talking or interviewing the other day actually, Chris Brinney, and he was talking, which I loved, and I'm going to talk about it now. Is this idea of using kind of like a warm up, using your training, and then having this recovery, but thinking about that around a meeting. And actually, are you fueled? Are you prepared? You talk a lot about how you utilize your mind, but like getting ready for these meetings as you would like training. Like, I'm putting my shoes on, I'm getting ready to go out, I've had breakfast, and then really that you're able to train properly, so you're able to perform in that meeting, and then afterwards have this kind of recovery phase. Well, how did the meeting go? And that's really similar to actually how an athlete thinks about their training, their fueling, their hydration, and then their recovery, their sleep afterwards. And I just thought that was a really lovely way to think about actually, using that analogy of an athlete, of training, but actually in this environment within business as well.
And the crazy thing is, for most people in business, they already do that, but not for themselves. They don't do it for the body. What they do it for is the task at hand. So they will do the research, they'll prepare the board papers, they will circulate them around, they'll have the conversations, etc. That's the warm up effectively to the meeting. Then you go into the meeting, you've already had those kind of pre-conversations. So the reality is, it should be just a case of either rubber stamping it to make sure you're doing it correct, or you're debating the one or two things that need to be debated. And then afterwards, you've taken the minutes during the meeting, you're then circulating, and you're adjusting the copy, you're putting the next set of actions into place, and that's normal. But because people have done that from a business perspective, and they've been trained to do that, whether that's a program management, change management, project management, business management kind of focus, it doesn't matter which one, they're all very similar disciplines, they do it. But what they haven't kind of got sometimes is actually saying, well, actually, what does my body need? And because a lot of businesses, and unfortunately still a lot of businesses today, don't focus on what the individual needs are and actually how that works, then they're kind of forgotten about. It's kind of, well, you just need to get yourself ready. And it's almost an afterthought that, you'll be okay, as opposed to actually saying, no, this is what you can do. And I think the more we can get this kind of information out to people, to say, no, you as a person are really important. I mean, what our business is made out of? They're made out of people. And when you look at most businesses, what's one of the biggest costs they have? Is people. And what's the biggest rhetoric that you hear from organisation? Our people is our differentiator. They're our talent. They're our value, etc. So change the rhetoric into action and actually value what it is they're doing, and give them that kind of knowledge to they can actually do that.
And I often wonder, like, going into businesses and corporates and seeing how people are, not sleeping, not moving. And you talk so much about movement, even away from exercise, right? Just moving around. Like, how can you expect your employees, your leadership team to be able to function at 100%, because let's face it, some of those meetings are so important in terms of big contracts that they're going to sign, or big decisions that are going to be made. You know, that person may not have eaten, they may not have drunk anything, they are not going to be able to perform at that high level, and yet you're expecting them to perform. Or, you know, even hopping on a plane, going on this long haul travel, and then doing some deal at the other end, you know, and you're wanting the best out of them. But, you know, how many, and I guess this is a big question for you know, your listeners, how many of your leadership team, how many of your employees are truly functioning in your business? What are they doing? You know, do you ask them about sleep? Do you ask them, are you encouraging movement in the office? What do you encourage, by the way, when you're talking to business leaders about like movement in the office?
Yeah, so make sure they're getting up. I mean, I usually tell a simple story around when I'm usually working inside a business and helping them with the change. What I will tend to do is if I'm in the office, I will make sure at least every hour I'm getting up, and I will go around and ask everybody if they want a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, if they want to go for a chat, etc. Just to get people up and moving. And
probably after your marathon, you're a bit stiffer to get up. Mate.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a given. We'll put a pin in that and come back to it. But yeah, just the idea of at least starting to break the day up, so it's not just being sat in the same position in the same place all the time and trying to just work through it, because it isn't conducive to really having great thoughts. And the thing is, everyone's kind of heard the tales of, oh yeah, you have a break, you go do something different, you get all these great ideas, etc. And they've seen all the memes where you've got a little picture of, I don't know, like a droplet of the amount of inspiration you get during a meeting, and a waterfall, the amount of inspiration when you go for a walk, and all those kind of things. It's known, but it's the difference between learnt knowledge and applied knowledge. And I think that's the kind of the big difference, is how do you turn that kind of, oh yeah, we know about that, into actually we're doing it, we're executing on it.
Right, information versus implementation, right? And like trialing that out, and, you know, utilizing like the information that you get back from that. And then of course, you know, a big mistake I see people making is not doing anything with the information they then gather. You know, well, I know, let's face it, you know, working in the world of nutrition, in the world of, you know, kind of personal health and development, most business professionals know what they need to do. But they are not doing it, and the big question is, why are they not doing it? And if they are, you know, collecting data about things, what are they doing? What are they doing with it? You know, most of us, right? I'm just sat here now. We've got Aura Ring, got, you know, a watch of some sort, right? That's tracking. But what are those people doing with that data? If you're still sat on your bum, you know, and you know, the classic thing of it, your watch telling you to move, and you go, oh, just turn it off. You know, so it's what prompts, you know, what prompts work for you as well. And actually, even people that are going to the gym and exercising, which is, you know, fantastic, they're definitely kind of one step up. There's really good research to show that those people, of course, that are exercising, if you're still sedentary and you're not moving in the office, that's also a massive problem in terms of long-term risk and health. I think a lot of people don't realize that they still need to be, you know, moving around. And that comes back to recovery, of course, because if you're training, you need to be able to recover. Otherwise, you're sat in the chair at work and you're not functioning. So it's really important, if you're trying to get these, you know, two things of your exercise, and if you are planning for some really exciting big adventures, which you have been, you know, that's a lot when you're trying to work full-time, run a business, working with big businesses, to be able to recover and still function. How did you manage that?
I think it all starts with a simple thing, let's put yourself first. And it's one thing I think a lot of people don't do. And half of it is because there's a worry, there's a fear that as soon as they start doing that, then they'll be seen as being less, they're seen as being non-committed, they're seen as whatever the kind of things kind of come out of the mind. There's all sorts of excuses that can happen. But it's that realization that if you can't put yourself first, then you're going to break down, and then what use are you going to be? And at that point is when they will push it to one side and they will bring somebody else in. And that is the bitterness of business in many respects, because from a corporation's perspective or a big business's perspective, you know, you are there to do a job, you know, and that's got to be the principal reason for that. But most businesses are starting to wake up to this idea that you can't burn people out. Yeah, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but most of the time it's because people don't take their own power back. And don't say, actually, I need to take this time. So a very simple method I teach my clients is put it in the diary. Most business people, they live and die by
block it out the diary so other people can see it, so that you're
Absolutely, and put themselves into the diary. So even if it's just, I'm going to go out for 15 minutes, half an hour's walk, whatever it is, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to use this time for preparing my meals, whatever it is that you need to do, get it in the diary, because if it's in the diary, it'll get done. If it's not in the diary, it doesn't get done. And then, okay, life happens. You know, you get a crisis, you get things happen, you've got a big project happen, you've got to go pitch for a piece of work. All these things we understand, but don't postpone yourself. Don't cancel on yourself. Postpone it. Move it around so it becomes as important as any other piece of work inside your diary. And this little simple techniques like this can really make the difference between performing brilliantly for yourself first. So I think I've got a quote I usually say, so you can be good to yourself, so you can be good for others tomorrow. And then that way they can perform for the business at the highest amount. Yeah, and not to do things like, you know, set 2-hour meetings. I mean, most of the time people's brains come out of their ears after 90 minutes. So just simple things, just reshaping things. And the thing is, most people are in control of that. And if you're not in control of that, if someone is doing things in a way that's actually detrimental to your health, speak up about it.
I think it's fine. I think it's really interesting because I work a lot with business professionals and athletes. So I've got a lot of athletes that are, you know, whether it's competing on elite circuits or you know, even in the Olympics, but those people are traveling a lot, and actually it's exactly the same as business professionals that are traveling a lot again now. Actually, like, you know, I've really found that people are flying again and going on kind of long journeys, and really developing this. You know, you talked about taking that kind of personal responsibility and actually saying, you know, this is what works for me, because if I do this, I perform at my best. And we were having a conversation earlier actually about routine. And I often talk to people like business professionals about, and athletes about, okay, so when life changes, as in, you know, you're going to be traveling, what does routine look like? How do you make like your travel routine? What, you know, where are you going through the airport? Where are you staying? What time are your meetings the next morning? Or, you know, for athletes, exactly that same principle. When are your target races? What time zones are you going into? And actually creating these kind of micro routines that you can take with you. Because I don't know if you agree, but what I hear often is, oh, but I'm away traveling. I was away traveling this week. Well, I mean, the other one, of course, we'll come back to is Christmas. But, you know, I was away traveling this week. Well, appreciate that it's really, really different. But actually, how did you function having alcohol every night? And I'm not saying, you know, I'm not the kind of alcohol Nazi sitting here, but, you know, it is everything in balance and moderation. And whilst that's really not very sexy to say, actually, that, unfortunately, that is, you know, that is the truth. And, you know, really thinking about what does that routine look like when you're away. And I see the kind of classic, you know, people going out for clients for dinner, and I get it. Like, actually, you know, might be at a nice restaurant, you're going to have a drink with your clients, you're trying to sign this big contract. I get it. I see it. But how can you make those other days that you're there, you know, what can you do to like really, really utilize your own body to be able to perform at the highest? You know, is that what you do for breakfast? Is that keeping really well hydrated? Is it that you actually only have one glass of wine? What is that? So I think, you know, really important that you have these micro routines. So whatever you do, what does my routine look like? And you will have had that routine, of course, for like marathon training, right? So you had to probably change that compared to what you were used to doing. If you're used to doing more strength work, what does your routine now look like doing this endurance? And I know, you know, I saw you a few times when you were working where you were also doing that long marathon training. It's like, well, how do I now fit this in, right? For when I'm away doing something. Is that what you often see as well? And
absolutely. And I think the difference being is I had first-hand experience of exactly what you're talking about. So prior to 2014, when I kind of had the awakening, that was my life. You know, I would be traveling. I think I was home maybe 1 week out of 6 a lot of the time. It was interesting. My wife around said during COVID, that was the first year we actually slept in the same bed for the entire year.
She thought she had a husband.
Well, no, never quite that bad, but you know, it was hard. You know, you're traveling all the time, various things going on, and you have all of the team briefings, you have the meetings, you have the client meetings, you're building rapport, etc. And then just simple little things that you start to learn. So one of the things I said to clients is, you know, you're not a dustbin. You do not have to eat just because it's been put in front of you. Things like, for example, going out for a drink with clients. Yes, I mean, I was doing a lot of work with law firms at one point, and the drinking culture there is crazy. Same with banks, for example. I was doing a lot of work in banking, and you don't have to drink it. That's the thing. And there are certain things that you can change. So, for example, have the one beer if you fancy it, or go for a zero alcohol beer, for example, or you switch it for something like a soda water and lime. So there's little things you can easily take on board. But then once you've kind of realised those, you've had your own personal awakening, it's then how do you start to put it into action? I think right at the beginning for me, that first 5 years of not getting any results was principally because I never got that side of my life right. Is actually how do I balance the business aspect of it? So what I was trying to do is I was trying to be really good when I was at home. I was doing all of the kind of training when I was there. I was eating well, etc. when I was there. But as soon as you got back into the business context, you're up for a brown bag lunch, you're up for the buffets, you're up for all those kind of other things. It just happened because you're in that large scale change environment, so you're trying to build these cohesive teams together. You're trying to create rapport very, very quickly. You're trying to get things working in a way that should with great passion and enthusiasm. All of a sudden you become second again. And that was probably the biggest kind of change for me when I kind of actually then realised in 2019 and actually started to make those changes, because it was those final tweaks that kind of made a difference.
And that it becomes important for me as a human being, for me to be able to be, a husband, a dad, and enjoy my life, right, and live your life, and be the business professional, really high performing as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, then it's a case of you change things around. So when it comes down to things like the fat loss and this strength training, etc., I was doing, it was learning how to eat the meals that supported the strength training around it. So, you'd have the meal beforehand that would be supporting that. So you make sure you've got carbohydrates in there. We talked about them earlier. So it's important for strength training as it is for endurance, but then also having the same afterwards. So you've actually given your body the energy it needs to actually repair itself. So you're giving the building blocks and the energy. And then later on in the day, I probably wouldn't have quite as many carbohydrates. So again, trying to balance off that insulin effect, that kind of happens. So there's various things that I was learning and tweaking and making work in my body the way it would need it to do. And then obviously changing for doing endurance training, obviously that's a bigger change again. So the volume of food you have to take in is a lot more.
Which is actually a change of your like how you think, isn't it, as well? Because I think, and I come back to the point that I started with actually, is if you haven't come from that endurance background, there is this almost semi-restriction kind of thinking of I can't have that amount. And I do, especially when I see athletes, but also when I see business professionals and I work with a lot of business professionals who are, competing at age group level of cycling, running, triathlon, and that is one of the biggest mistakes. Is actually you do need to be eating more, and I think some people also, we're talking about kind of just forgetting about it because you're in a meeting, but also that it's okay to have your water bottle with you. It's okay to have a snacks in your bag. Actually that is pretty acceptable, and if you're going to a conference or whatever, like bung some snacks in your bag so you've got something, because if it's not there, you're not going to eat it, and you'll end up eating whatever is in, that white buffet or that brown paper bag, as you call it,
or the vending machine.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you're tired, and of course we're not going to talk about depth about sleep today, but we know that obviously when you're tired, that your stress hormones change, your appetite hormones change, and then you're more likely to go and eat stuff that you didn't set out to.
Well, that's right. It makes making poor decisions. And those poor decisions aren't just about what you eat. Those poor decisions actually bleed over into what you're doing every single day. It's poor decisions in the project you're doing, the change you're doing, with the client work that you're doing, whatever it is at that point in time. Those poor decisions kind of just leak into it. It's just, and I think that's one thing, again, that linkage between what happens personally and what happens professionally, there isn't it's not one or the other, they're both actually amalgamated. And I don't think a lot of people have kind of realised that. And there's, again, the very classic saying of anything you do is everything you do. And the realisation that actually what you do in your own life will get mirrored in what happens in your professional life. So sometimes if things are not happening the way you want inside your business, actually look at what you're doing in your own life. Where is that kind of sometimes failing you? Because sometimes the correction there will actually bring the correction into the business as well.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about, kind of looking from that side into the business, actually, because I often see the other side from the business leaking into personal life, and then not like, I say performing in personal life, but it is, like having time for your, your family, your time out of the business, so that you can kind of use that word, kind of recover, but you can enjoy life, because after all, what is what is having all that wealth that you're building? What are you going to do with it if your body is in a place of disrepair? And one of the things that I've heard a number of people say, well, it's okay, we've got private medical insurance, right? And most businesses, and I'm sure you come across this, do have private medical care. Brilliant. But that is there for when you're unwell. It's not there to prevent disease. So, only you can future-proof yourself. And that is the more challenging aspect of it, is that you have got to be in it.
Yeah. There is no health insurance per se. Your life is your health insurance, so you've got to kind of look after it. But it's interesting that you've kind of seen it from the other way around, where you've seen the business impacting personal lives, and I can agree with you. I've seen that as well. But it does happen the other way around quite significantly, and you can see it, especially when you start to manage large projects over multi-years and things, and you're working with teams, and you get to see other very closely. You can see, for example, in what happens in the day-to-day, in their interactions, in their reporting, in the amount of action that they take. You can almost track it back to what's going on. So you can see, for example, when they're having bad days with their spouse. They can see when things are not going well with their kids at school. You can see when they might be having money worries. And you don't need to necessarily always ask the questions in those specifics, because sometimes that can be classified as prying, and people don't want to talk about those inside the business setting. But you can see how those things actually impact what they're doing. You can see when they've not had enough sleep or enough rest, when they're having so many other stresses in their life. And that's the kind of key thing. And poor performance in your own personal health, it's a stressor. And just having to realise that simple thing, that actually, if you're not working at your best, how on earth can you expect to give your best?
I think, when people are making sort of big changes, I think they feel that this is just another thing that they have to do, because let's face it, things haven't worked in the past, and that's why you see people buying lots of different gadgets or some sort of quick fix. But ultimately, and I hope you'll agree with me, ultimately, once you craft your strategy, once you trial it, once you test it, once you go back and look at the data, actually it just becomes this routine, doesn't it? It just becomes a habit that you have, but also one that you need to go back and review. You can't just set it and forget about it, but it becomes a habit and routine, and that's entirely possible. I mean, you have totally changed around your life from 2014 in terms of really kind of not looking after your body, to transforming that and being able to maintain it. And I think that's the most difficult part, is people don't learn how to maintain.
Thank you.
And also kind of, you've done an amazing job, and I forget the percentages now, but most people fail in any health attempt because they don't recognise how to maintain it. And that in itself is a skill, something you need to learn, something you need to craft and work on the whole time.
And it's interesting you say that. And I mean, literally, my body has transformed. I'm literally half the man I used to be, and I think it's the better half now, so I'm kind of pleased. But it's about, how do you keep that? Because actually creating it and getting there, some people use some really bad habits to do it,
of course,
high caloric restriction, large amounts of exercise, etc., things that are just non-sustainable. But then there's this other kind of myth, this maintenance myth, which really frustrates the hell out of me. So many people talk about, once you get to this mythical kind of value, you've got this perfect kind of way, everything's okay. Exactly, you don't have to change anything. But that in itself is just so untrue, because your body is changing each and every moment, and who you were in the morning is not who you are in the evening. And
every day your energy needs are different. And I often come back to, and this is kind of, again, and I'm sure you will have seen this big mistake of this kind of generic generic diet plan. Okay, but what are you doing today? Because that's going to be so different. And you're absolutely right. Now, you're doing something different every single day. It depends on what your training is, whether you're traveling, all of those different sort of changes, as well as aging, because our body does go through changes, and male and females, as we know, go through slightly different changes, but we both go through hormonal changes, and that does impact, and it's learning about it. And I think the biggest part I call it actually relapse prevention planning, because really it's thinking about what sends you off track, because if you've learned, actually, where are my triggers? We were talking about traveling, and for a lot of people that becomes their excuse, actually, I'm going to say, is, well, I'm traveling, well, it's Christmas. Well, yeah, but Christmas doesn't last for a whole month, so we can't keep using those excuses and actually calling that out, but really understanding where are your tripping points? Where do you go off piece, so to speak? And it's really being able to recognize that very quickly and then say, okay, what is my strategy to get me back on track? Because that's where people fall off track, is that they go, oh shit, I'm like somewhere down here. And then that's 4 weeks ago now gone past, and they go, well, it didn't work for me. Well, it did work for you, but what you didn't want to recognize maybe, or didn't listen to, is actually what your body is telling you, where those barriers are. And we all have those, don't we? Like, you know, no one's perfect. And I'm not going to sit here saying that I don't have any of those. Of course I do, but you have to know what they are and have a strategy to get around it.
Exactly. And I was away at the Brighton Fringe over the weekend with my wife.
Amazing.
I enjoyed having ice creams. I enjoyed having cake, but I paid for it because, you know, I have a gluten intolerance, which actually means I've got spots in various places across my body. And that's just one of the various symptoms that comes out. But I know that's the kind of thing that happens with me. So it's something, okay, I made the conscious decision to do that. But then coming back to that whole piece of measuring and monitoring, actually creating a plan. And again, from a business perspective, we do this already, you know. So you know, eons ago, we used to be, you just did your end of year reports, but that meant you had 12 months, and then everyone was like feverishly like trying to pull things together at the last minute. You know, that's when your final sales are coming in, and that's why, for example, a lot of businesses, they would offer massive discounts just to win the deal by the end of the year. And in some sectors, that's still the case, unfortunately. But then for many, they've picked up the whole thing of doing like 90-day plans. Now, 90-day plans are a great thing because it means now you have almost like 4 end of years per year. So you've got a way of being able to check that. And that 90-day plan, you split into 3 30-day plans. So you have the first one is you've got a hypothesis. You want to now test the hypothesis. You think it's going to do this. You start that work in there. You put it together. It's going to be a bit clunky, a bit lumpy, but you know, you make it work. Then the next 30 days, you know it's kind of, you've got a rhythm, so you're synthesizing it quite nicely. You're getting that. And then that last 30 days, you think, actually, can I squeeze some more? How can I optimize this effectively at that point? And that same principle, it can bring into your own life. And if you're almost like saying, okay, this is what I want to do for the next 30 days. I want to learn how to run. I want to learn how to improve my strength. I want to be able to, I don't know, lose a bit of fat, whatever it's going to be that you're kind of targeting from your personal performance perspective, and you split it into those same segments, it means that you've got a different time horizon each time. You can change and switch and tweak, etc., as long as you're monitoring along it. The other kind of tweak I do with my clients is I get them to split them into 4 weeks rather than 30 days because it's easier to manage. But that means anybody doing the math at the moment will realise that 90 days is actually 13 weeks. So I said, well, just schedule the 12 weeks and keep the 13 weeks spare. Because in any quarter, you can almost guarantee something's going to go wrong. You know, the car's going to break down. There's going to be something happens with the kids at school. There's going to be some emergency in the house. Something's going to go wrong at work. It always does. Being there. So by not putting the additional pressure on trying to squeeze every single moment out of those 13 weeks and actually saying, no, I'm going to accept 12, you can have those oops moments. You can have the day when you're having the ice cream on Brighton Beach, whatever, because it doesn't matter anymore. You've already accounted for it. And
I think coming into kind of, you know, the kind of like, just, you know, having the ice cream, whatever, you know, actually when you and if you're thinking about business as well, when you're looking at business and when you're looking at your body, and you know, it's not about not doing something, not having the ice cream, not having the glass of wine, the beer, whatever it is that you fancy. You know, change is about consistency, isn't it? Training is about consistency. You know, I see lots of athletes, like age group athletes that I work with, that they wonder why they don't get this really good result, but they're not being consistent with their diet, and they're not being consistent with hydration, they're not being consistent with their training. And if you flip that over onto the flip side, you know, if you consistently just have an ice cream here or there, or consistently just eat a little bit too much, you know, at those kind of buffets or whatever it might be, that is not going to get you the result that you want. But on the flip side, if you can consistently actually eat in a really strategic way, that you can keep hydrated, that you can move, that you're exercising, the occasional doesn't make any difference. But it's when you do little things very, very often. And that's often what I pick up on actually with clients is, you know, well, actually on you know, the face of it, actually this looks great. But when you dig deep, actually it's the tiny things that people don't think makes a difference that actually makes a huge difference. So that works both ways in terms of positive and and negative.
Yeah, and I would say the same inside business. So, you see, for example, I don't know, a fractional loss each and every month. It might feel small on a weekly, monthly basis, but by the time you get to the end of the quarter or the end of the year, that fractional loss suddenly becomes a bigger percentage. And likewise, if you're making those fractional improvements, again, it might feel hardly worthwhile, but by the time you get to the end of it, it makes a big difference. And you're right. I mean, when we look at this from a sporting perspective, we've had so many great examples of exactly that approach. I mean, I always like what the British cycling team did with Chris Froome and everybody.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, they were looking at shaving like half a gram off of the weight of a chain or something, or actually, just literally altering the timing of fueling by minutes just to optimize that for that specific athlete. Well, that's what made the big differences. That's what made the difference at the Tour de France and things.
Yeah.
So,
and that's that compound effect, isn't it? The kind of stacking of those, of those changes. And interestingly, and I don't know whether you see this as well, is that people often will not address what they really need to address. Like personally, and we talked about this right at the very beginning, well, actually, you're talking about like the chain, and particularly things like using a certain type of oil is going to change your power wattage output and things like that. Well, actually, you could buy that's really expensive, so people will throw money at like, my watts will improve. Well, actually, if you just lost 1 kilogram, it would improve threefold. So actually it comes back to what you said right at the very beginning of actually taking time out for yourself. And I mean time out as in like spending time learning about yourself, listening to yourself, and applying all those same strategies that you apply in business. I say applying, it's like a not a lotion, but implementing those strategies that you have in a business and utilizing them with yourself. Yeah. And kind of working with your own system.
100%. Yeah. And people, and that's the hard message for people, because the fast method to get the reaction is actually the slow method. It's the putting the effort in, it's applying yourself. It's not going out and buying the next gadget and gizmo. And working in that whole digital transformation change space, which I've been doing now for decades. You see all the time, people suddenly think, oh, I'll just buy that widget, whatever it's going to be, an ERP, a CRM, a AI tool, whatever kind of set of acronym buzzwords you want to pull out of the hat. Marketing is great, isn't it? And they'll think, okay, that's going to solve the problem. But actually, you've got to bring it up a level. And that kind of mirrors a lot of what I did in my career. I started off, thinking computers are great. They're a great way of being able to help solve so many people's problems. So I wanted to get into that area, and then suddenly realized actually it's how you use these things that actually make the difference. So I then started doing lots of things like software development, and that kind of brought me into like architecture and things, and suddenly realized it's not just any one piece. It's actually you have to look at the system as a whole. Yeah. You've got to look at the business hierarchy, the business processes, the people you've got in your team, how that actually then comes together around your vision and your mission, how that actually then applied and automated using things like your applications and your software, how you actually then store the information, how that's sent around different people, who needs access to what and when, and then actually how do you materialize that on something they can actually use. And it's only when you've got the whole of that working together that you're going to get the benefits. So same for yourself. You can get the greatest bike chain in the entire world. If you never sit on a blinking bike, it's going to make no difference whatsoever.
And I think that comes back to like the basics. And again, this isn't sexy. It's quite boring, isn't it, so to speak? But but actually, unless you're looking at all those basic aspects, you're talking about like that system. Actually, all the foundations need to be in place, don't they? And I think you're absolutely right. You get the latest AI tool, or there's some marketing trend, and you go, well, that's going to solve my problem. But it's quick and it's dirty and it's cash, and it's like, well, I've got the cash, I'll spend it on that. But it never truly solves the problem, because you haven't solved the foundational problem underneath, or you haven't looked at how all of that works. And I see that so often, like working as a clinical dietitian, so medical, I see that so often, that people are asking me these almost like what. I kind of visualize it in terms of they're asking me about, I don't know, a turmeric supplement or something like that up here. And I'm like, okay, well, we can talk about that, but actually that's not going to solve what you're saying your problem is. And actually it's not till you look underneath. You go, yeah, but you're not eating any fiber, you're not eating any antioxidants or polyphenols. They're actually going to reduce the inflammation. So why are we talking about turmeric? So it is. And come back to your body as a system as well. I often use IT actually as an analogy for that as well. And actually your body has everything it needs to be able to sort out problems. People are on some, kind of crazy alkaline diets, all sorts of things. We forget our kidneys can do that. Like this is crazy, you know. And actually work with your body, because your body tells you so much. But it's if we listen, right?
Exactly. And it's amazing. It is those base building blocks that make the big difference. And again, the guys that go on, got hearts coming up. Go and have a listen to the episode we did previously with Mark, where we're going exactly the same happened with him. So Mark came to me. He was fairly overweight, into his 50s, and just really wanted to change his life and become fitter, because he used to run marathons and things before in the past. And it just kind of things.
Which is what we see so much actually in business with business professionals. I used to be an athlete, and it's really sad actually to see that. You know, that has diminished, but it's actually how do you also get that back, that passion?
Absolutely. And for him, he was saying, "Oh yeah, and I'm taking all of my apple cider vinegar and turmeric and various other things." It's like, okay, great, but what are you actually doing for your meals? You know, I'm having Nando's every Friday. It's kind of a tradition in the family. We have takeaways on this day. It's busy on Wednesdays because of my son's football. All these kind of things that add up. And then you say, okay, well, what are you doing for exercise for yourself? Well, not really that much. Okay, well, that kind of explains a few things. And then suddenly when you start to change, you get these building blocks of life almost put back into it. That's completely revolutionized his life. And that's just kind of one of many kind of examples we can both pick out to say, you know, just go back to the basics. It's not sexy. It is absolutely probably the one thing nobody ever wants to hear, but it's the one that works. And it works because, you know, at the end of the day, as a species, 10, 20,000 years old the way we currently are, it takes a long time for our bodies to change. It hasn't changed that much in the last 20,000 years.
I think that's where, you know, I talk about quite a lot, you know, in the media actually as well, is you know, about what are the red flags for what you should be looking out for. Because, you know, we're sat here talking about, actually, we're going back to basics, talking about foundation. It isn't sexy. It's not like, no marketing you slap on that is gonna make people really want to buy it, right? Because they want a quick fix. Like CEOs, COOs, they don't have time. Like we both know that. And so I can see why these kind of things that you think are going to solve a problem, people will just pay because then they've done it, haven't they? Well, I'll just buy this ring because that will sort it out, and boom, bush, done, 2 minutes. And you know, actually, I would say ask yourself these questions before you buy something, before you look at something. Like, ask yourself, who's selling it? What's the research behind it? Can you actually understand what the research is behind it? You know, is it good research? And actually, what am I doing underneath this? You know, I've worked a lot more recently and working in a big research project at the moment around weight loss medications. And the history of my working has been in eating disorders and also those people that are overeating. So worked a lot in bariatric surgery. And now, of course, the weight loss drugs that are coming to the forefront, I can see great kind of places for this in terms of health. But what I see so often now is people are taking a weight loss medication, but they're not changing their diet, they're not changing their exercise. One, they're not going to get totally the results that they want, but two, they're actually creating a body that's really undernourished, losing muscle mass. So actually, yes, whilst it might decrease the risk of things like type 2 diabetes, they can help to lose weight, reduce risk of stroke, cardiovascular disease, all of those long-term metabolic diseases. They're losing muscle mass, which means actually they're more at risk of falls, but also starting to see nutritional deficiencies in these people. I mean, I've seen athletes take it, they can't run a marathon because they're not eating enough. So I think, you know, look out for those red flags. Ask yourself, actually, have I done everything that I need to myself?
And the other side of it, and I know a few clients of mine that have done that, they've kind of gone out, they've had those conversations with whomever, and ended up taking those drugs. And the worry they've got is there was no protocol to say this is how you ramp up. There's no protocol to say this is how you ramp off. Actually, so is this something you have to now take for life? And then what's the long-term impact? I mean, is this going to be the next smoking? But we don't know.
I think the kind of being in that area at the moment as well is we don't have enough research. Now, it doesn't mean to say that, although I'm very evidence-based, you know, sometimes we don't have the evidence. It doesn't mean to say it's not going to work, but it's weighing up those risks, isn't it? Saying, well, you know, should I take this risk right now? What do we think is going to be the long-term risk? But also, and this comes back to things like, you know, quick fix diets, whether you're looking at, you know, we used to use as a protocol utilizing really low-calorie diets in people with diabetes. That did work. Of course it worked. But how do people then go out there and really kind of maintain that long term? How do they manage that long term? And I think with these weight loss drugs, I think we're going to see a great impact in terms of, probably on the economy, but, in terms of long term health risks. But what we do know right now from research is those people with the current drugs that we have, is that those people who then stop having those injections, if they haven't changed lifestyle, if they haven't improved their exercise levels, and of course, appetite, we know then is then turned back on because of the pathway that it works on, is that those people do regain weight. And they don't regain all of that weight, not all of them. But there's a big kind of, I think there's some great things that kind of come out of it, but I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of educating people, in terms of really helping people to help themselves.
I think let's go back to where we started that thread,
Yes.
which was all around the idea of people looking for quick fixes rather than actual long-term things. And I remember having a conversation with a marketing consultant that has like a multi-million-pound billing each year, effectively. And he used to say exactly the same thing. He says people will spend anything for a cure. Once they've kind of got the problem, they'll spend anything for a cure, but they'll spend nothing on prevention. And we see the same happening inside organisations. Many of them, they will not invest in the continuous improvement, and many of them have got into the trap where effectively the sweat it and forget it kind of asset management process was the norm. But actually the way that technology, the way that business is changing now, that's no longer available. They've got to now face the reality of continually improving and almost being driven down that by the way business is happening. And the same thing, I think you could take that same mentality from a personal perspective. I think everyone says I don't have enough time to be able to fit these in, but I think the Robinson's law kind of happens. It's like for example, those people that say they're night owls or early birds, etc. How productive are they in those hours? And when you start to break it down and say, no, if you actually improve your own personal performance so that you're thinking straighter, you make better decisions, you get to things more clearly, then I can give you some time back. Then it almost becomes like the adage of having a great accountant. If you have a great accountant, you should never pay for your accountant effectively. The amount that they save you year on year pays for itself. With your body and your performance, you shouldn't have to pay for it with your time effectively, because the time that you actually improve your body gives you much better performance so that you're performing better in the moments that you actually need it. Your schedule becomes better anyway.
And certainly working with clients, and I talk about that as well, is you can actually almost regain time back because you become more efficient, because you're, once you fuel your brain properly, your brain is processing more quickly, your reaction times, all of those things we know are changed. And actually, because people eat better, therefore they sleep better, they are able to perform better. So people do actually say to me, I actually now have time to exercise. Well, they always had time to do it, but now they feel like they can because they've got energy to be able to do it. So absolutely, you regain that back, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to measure it out. And it's provable. That's the other kind of key thing.
Yeah.
So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Claire, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point. We can talk a lot more about what you do, because I think it's an absolutely fascinating area. And again, a big heartfelt thank you for all of the support over the last 8 months to a year and everything you've taught me. I'm going to continue to use that and probably keep bugging you and make you despair sometimes.
I'm waiting for the next adventures.
Well, it's not going to be long. We've got the National Three Peaks coming up, then Kilimanjaro at the end of the year, and then there's another marathon.
Just a small challenge then.
Oh yes,
Keep it small.
Yeah, exactly. nothing major. So there's all that lot coming up as well. So I think we've got lots of enjoyable, fun things to talk about over those years as well. And as I say, I'd love to get you back on the show to talk a lot more about what you do, because I think there's some fascinating areas that you've got in there. And for you guys, thank you all for listening. It has really been a pleasure having you here, and thank you for taking the time out to actually listen to this episode of the Fit for Business and Life podcast. And as you know, the Fit for Business and Life podcast is brought to you in partnership with Sharp Fit for Life and the Business Body Network, bringing more health, happiness and higher achievement to busy business owners, entrepreneurs, and all of their teams as well. If you'd like to get in touch with us to be either part of the show or just to have a conversation about the topics that we've been talking about, then reach out on hello@sharpfitforlife.com. We're also available on all the socials. You can find us at Sharp Fit for Life, and this podcast episode is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's everywhere, but Amazon's the other one that Dom says I have to keep mentioning. So do give us a like, give us a subscribe, and share it with people that you think need to hear this kind of message so that it actually helps their life. So once again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Fit for Business Life podcast. the Fit for Business Life podcast was produced by Wax Tie Limited. All copyright is applied.